Hey, and welcome to episode number 5 of the Main Card podcast. I'm your host, Joe Murata, and I'd like to thank you guys for stopping by and checking out this week's episode recap of UFC 240, which took place yesterday, July 27th. And this was a really good fight card, in my opinion. I watched the main card. I didn't get to watch any of the prelims, but the main card had some pretty entertaining fights, although 4 of them did go to decision. But it was a really good card, in my opinion. The fights were very competitive, very back and forth. And so let's just see how we did with last week's predictions and how we actually did. So first off, we had Jocko beating Marc-Andre Barriault by decision. And that is correct. Marc-Andre Barriault did lose to Jocko. We had Olivier Aubin-Mercier defeating Armin Saru by submission. Armin Saru did win by decision, so we were wrong on that one. We had Niko Price defeating Jeff Neal by KO. Jeff Neal actually won by KO. We had Chris Cyborg winning by KO over Felicia Spencer. Chris Cyborg did win, however, by decision. And Max Holloway beating Frankie Edgar by KO. And Frankie Edgar did lose to Max Holloway, but it was also by decision. So 3 out of 5 fights predicted correctly, and we'll break down each fight a little bit. I have a couple notes here I took on my phone of the fights while I was watching them and just kind of what I took away from it, so that way I wouldn't forget, because I am recording this almost a full 24 hours later. So yeah, let's the first fight with Jocko and Marc-Andre Barriault. Let's just get into that real quick, because that started off the main card. And with this fight, it was pretty uneventful in my opinion. There wasn't really a whole lot of damage taken by either fighter. There was a lot of clinch work by Jocko, having Marc-Andre Barriault against the cage, because that's definitely where he was winning these fights, was when he had Marc his back up against the cage and he was able to get elbows and knees while working the clinch. I think he was just too afraid of Marc's power he had and his explosiveness from the outside, so Chris did do a good job with keeping that fight where he wanted, for the most part, up on the cage and the clinch. The third round, Barriault did become very aggressive, but Jocko got a late takedown in that round. So, but the first 2 rounds, very hard to score, but I would think Jocko would have got the edge there. And Marc-Andre Barriault, he had the third round won until I think he got that late takedown against him. And but there was no real damage taken by either fighter. No one was really cut up or bruised up, bloodied up, or anything. So it just became, I guess, like a fight that was just really all about the scoring and what the judges saw. And I believe it was actually a split decision, so that's how close the fight was. But in the end, Jocko did get the nod, and he gets the win. And that was probably the worst fight of the whole card. The other 4 fights, even though also most of them were decisions, but they were very good, back and forth, and it was pretty obvious who won those fights with just the damage and the pacing. It's just this fight kind of started off the pay-per-view on a lull, but it definitely wasn't a sign of things to come. So that was Jocko winning by decision over Marc-Andre Barriault. And the second fight we had was Armin Saru versus Olivier Aubin-Mercier. And that was a close fight for the most part, but Armin was definitely more aggressive. The first 2 rounds, was it? Maybe first and second round, Olivier did get more damage in. His punches seemed to do more impact, but Armin was landing more punches. Olivia gets a takedown, but so Olivia got a takedown and landed on his back, and then he was fighting from his guard for the entire rest of that round. This is round 3. I should be a little bit more clear about that. So Olivia got a takedown in round 3, but the way he landed it, he was on his back, and Armin fell into his guard, and he was just kind of throwing hands and elbows at him. while I was in the guard. So, and that was, I think, 30 seconds into round 3. So the whole 4th round, it just kind of sealed the deal that Armin definitely won that fight. Armin did escape 2 triangle choke attempts from OAM, and he definitely probably didn't really have a very good chance on finishing them, just because in those 3rd rounds when it's so late into a fight and they're all sweaty, it's hard to get those chokes to stick, just because their sweat will be naturally make them more slippery and a little bit hard to get those chokes sunk in. And he was also trying to give him a triangle from his back, so he didn't have the best leverage. It was all about his arm strength, and 15 minutes into a fight with the sweat and just fatigue, he probably wasn't able to keep that going. But yeah, so Armin Saru looks very good, very promising. I think he's very young too. I think he's 22 or 23 or something. So he has a good future ahead of him, and it'll be interesting to see what he does next. And then our 3rd fight on that card was Jeff Neal versus Niko Price. I think this was what fight of the night it had to have been, right? Yeah, I mean, there was a bunch of crazy exchanges in this fight. There was almost a double knockout. I think Jeff Neal clipped Niko Price, but Niko Price headbutted him on the way down, and they both kind of Jeff Neal actually stumbled and fell to his back, and Niko was starting to drop too. So I thought there was be a double knockout, but both of them were able to keep their wits about themselves and not get knocked out, obviously. And then Niko ended up on top trying to finish him, but he recovered. There was a lot of back and forth damage on each other. Niko was bloodied up. Jeff Neal bruised up. I remember Niko went for a guillotine, but I think Jeff Neal escaped that, and then he got into side control. I think Niko pulled a guillotine, and after that escape by Jeff Neal, he ended up in full guard after the side control, and then that's when he finished the fight from atop with the ground and pound, and the ref kind of stopped it right, I think 1 or 2 punches before he probably would have got finished. So I think that was a really good stoppage. And with Jeff Neal, I mean, he's undefeated in the UFC. He's got a lot of momentum for him. He's looking super strong. Niko Price, even though if he did lose, I don't think this is going to hurt his stock much. He was entertaining to watch. He was throwing a lot of different type of attacks. He was, he almost had Jeff Neal put away for a little bit too. So, he did get stopped in the 2nd round, but in my eyes, he looked really good. And I think both of them have, a pretty good future ahead of them. Don't know if titles is ever in the picture for, someone like Niko Price. But Jeff Neal, definitely, he could be someone to pay attention to for any, casual fans like myself that, kind of want to see what may be next. Be ahead of the curve, and Jeff Neal could be one of them that's challenging in the future. The co-main event, Chris Cyborg versus Felicia Spencer. How is Cyborg going to bounce back from that Amanda Nunes fight? Is she going to have that same motivation, that same confidence? These were all questions that we were all thinking leading into this fight. And for the most part, Chris Cyborg came out and she just dominated the fight. Chris Cyborg, she had tons of powerful attacks, a lot of knees to the body, a lot of leg kicks, great combinations with her hands. Although Spencer in the 1st round got Cyborg with the lead elbow, and it put a huge gash on Cyborg's forehead, so she was bloodied up for almost the whole fight. But I think that was just a case of the cut looking worse than what it actually was. Spencer, for as great as Cyborg did with all the damage and just all the pressure she put on Felicia Spencer, this may be another case too. This doesn't hurt Spencer's stock at all for being her first loss as a professional fighter. She looked really good in terms of just being able to withstand all those punches and kicks and knees from Cyborg for a full 15 minutes. She definitely has a chin on her. She was even able to get Cyborg up against the cage in the clinch several times, and she was definitely winning those exchanges on the cage. It's just she wasn't able to really secure that takedown, and she wasn't really able to keep that fight against the cage long enough like Jocko did in the first fight of this pay-per-view. But, I mean, that just shows how good Cyborg is. And Felicia Spencer, outside of Cyborg at that 145 division in the women's weight class, I don't think, there's anyone that could be a problem for Spencer. I think Spencer will still be a top 2 fighter up there in that division. And, if Cyborg retires, she's 35 or so. And I don't know how long her contract extension was with the UFC, but if she retires, Spencer could just be right there waiting to take over and be the new champion in a couple years. But back to Cyborg, we gave Spencer her praise for withstanding 15 minutes of being in an octagon with Cyborg and withstanding all that punches and all that damage she took. But Cyborg, she had the conditioning. She didn't seem like she slowed down after all 3 rounds. Although, she has been fighting 5-round fights for a while, but she was able to go the whole distance. She had a lot of power throughout the whole fight, it seemed. Looked really good with her combinations. She was just picking up everything that she could from prior fights with just the way she was moving and getting in and out of fights. She never was really in danger because she knew Spencer won that fight on the ground, and it just didn't get there, and that was just all because of Cyborg. It wasn't for any lack of effort or skill by Spencer's side. It was just all praise to Cyborg, and she looked really good after the fight. Joe Rogan did ask her, if she's looking forward to the Amanda Nunes fight. She said yes. Nunes has since tweeted that she's looking forward to fighting Cyborg again, so that might be our next fight for Cyborg and Nunes. It'll be a rematch at 145. And Cyborg, even I heard too, they said, cutting down to 145 is a big, hard task for her to do as well. And she was fighting at 135 at one point. I think she said she walks around at 170 or something. So for a female to cut 35, 40 pounds or so, it's a lot. But she looked really good, and I'm excited for the Cyborg Nunes too, I'm sure, as everyone else is. If you're a fan of women's MMA, there's nothing better than these 2 fighters in the cage together. And so Cyborg gets the win by decision. She wasn't able to finish her by KO, but, she'll take the unanimous decision win. And, good for her. And then our main event was Max Holloway versus Frankie Edgar, the champion, versus the number 4 ranked Frankie Edgar. And, so let's just break down that fight, because there's a lot to take away from that. Yeah, so Max Holloway gets the decision win, unanimous decision. I think 2 judges had it 50-45. One had it 48-47. I might have had it more 48-47 myself. I don't think a lot of people gave Frankie Edgar much credit for what he was able to accomplish in the octagon when he was doing good. I was very surprised with his pressure he came out with. Max Holloway's usually the one with the pressure. Max was kind of sitting back, seemed like for the beginning, first minute or 2 of each round, just waiting to counter. And that's not the way I usually see Max Holloway fight. And Frankie Edgar just, he was seeming like he was okay with just getting into a boxing striking match with Max Holloway, and that just didn't work out for him. And I think with takedowns, I think he attempted 14 or 15 takedowns and was only able to get 1. Max Holloway did just a supreme job at stuffing all the takedowns and keeping the fight on his feet. And even the 1 takedown Frankie had, nothing really came of it. Max Holloway got up pretty quickly. I think Frankie might have landed 1 punch while he was there on the ground. And, that just shows Max Holloway is the best featherweight of all time, in my opinion, and many people's as well. But Max Holloway, man, he's got those quick jabs. He keeps his hands down, and he's just kind of like the way he fights is, he gets his hands down, he's hunched over, and he just pops them up real quick. And it just, when he's throwing the jabs from so low, the fighters can't see him coming. And I guess just the way he throws them so quickly, he's like the best jabber, I think, in the UFC. I don't know if there's anyone who just utilizes his lead jab better than Max Holloway. And that's why I think, he's a champion. And it's going to be hard for anyone to get to him. And he's just so big for that division. So even if he's going to be fighting people like Volkanovski next, he's giving up a lot of size fighting Max Holloway. And just like Frankie Edgar, that might be too much. Max Holloway might be able to just keep that distance. And Frankie Edgar, though, he did have good pacing. He had some success with his hands. He definitely connected quite a few times on Max Holloway, but it just didn't really do any real damage. And Max was the one, cutting up his face, giving some bruises and just always popping him. Just for every 2 or 3 shots Max Holloway would take, he would dish out 4 or 5 of them. And that's just the way we're used to seeing him fight. And it was impressive to watch. Watching Max Holloway, it's kind of like watching John Jones in a bit, in terms of just like, it may not be the most entertaining thing just for just value of like watching like a Francis Ngannou or like an Alistair Overeem. But just as like just a fan of the sport and of the craft of what they're doing, I mean, it's almost textbook of how perfect his whole game plan was. And when they were going to his corner in between rounds, like his conversations he was having with the corner, like you could tell he was really like listening to the advice that they were getting, and even giving some feedback back to the coaches, but like, I don't know if that's going to work. I see that. And sometimes you hear fighters in their corner talking to their coaches, and they'll be saying like, okay, coming out of this round, we need a takedown. And then they won't attempt one for the entire fight. And I think having a championship level team behind you is a huge reason for having success. But yeah, Frankie did land some good leg kicks, and I thought that was going to be a bigger problem. Frankie might have landed, over a dozen leg kicks, but it never slowed Max Holloway down. None of them did too much damage, apparently. And Frankie kind of went away from them for a while, and I thought that was going to be his way to get into Max Holloway, was get those leg kicks so he's less mobile, get on the inside, and then get the takedown from there. But he didn't, and I don't blame him. He might have been, thinking in his head, I'm sure I'm landing leg kicks, but I'm getting punched 4 times in the head for every time that happens, and maybe just decide that game plan wasn't working. And man, it was sad to see Frankie Edgar after the fight, give that speech. I think he knows that, he may be done in terms of the title challenges. He did mention something about going down to bantamweight. I don't know. He's 37. I don't know if he's going to be able to start cutting down to 135 at that age. I imagine the older you get, the harder it is to cut down to weight. Just seeing him on the mic with Rogan, just choked up crying. His son comes out there. But, I mean, he's a legend. He's a Hall of Famer. And, he was trying to become a 2-division champion, being a champion at 155 in the past, but it wasn't his night. And, it's nothing against Frankie Edgar, that's Max Holloway, that's blessed. And that's just how it's going to go down 9 out of 10 times, in my opinion. But yeah, so that's just our quick takedowns of all the fights. It was pretty entertaining outside of that first fight, decisions, but Max Holloway just showing, just how great he really is. Cyborg showing how great she really is. The explosive fight between Jeff Neal and Niko Price, just all the wild exchanges. Armin versus Olivia, and Armin just showing how much potential he has. And, with the Chris and Marc Andre Barrio fight, not a whole lot there. But, 4 of the 5 fights were really good. And I was a bit surprised because I even said, too, in the last podcast, I thought this card was pretty damn weak. I thought it wasn't really worth the money. But looking back on it, definitely I think was, seeing stuff with Chris Cyborg and Max Holloway just continue their dominance. It's a sight to be seen. And, this was a really good fight card. And I know usually we touch on next week's fights on the midweek podcast, but we could just, run it down a little bit right here. Next week, looks like it's a 3 p.m. main card. What time's the prelims? Noon? Yeah, so noon and then 3 p.m. for the main cards. Both the prelims and the main card is on ESPN, not ESPN Plus. So if you have cable, just standard ESPN. And that's the Robbie Lawler Colby Covington fight. And let's see what we got on this card. Jim Miller, Clay Guida. That's the co-main. That's a pretty interesting fight. Just 2 old veteran legends, co-main eventing a fight. Joaquim Silva versus Nasrat Haqparast. Trevin Giles versus Gerald Mersheret. Scott Holtzman versus Dong Hyun Ma. Darko Stosic versus Kennedy Nsekhewu. I promise, but next on our midweek podcast, I'll figure out how to pronounce all their names. I'm just reading the card for the first time. And, those are some some crazy last names. But we'll get them right next time. But yeah, the main thing next week is the Colby Covington Robbie Lawler fight. Huge implications on the welterweight division. I mean, Colby's ranked 1. I don't know where Robbie's ranked. I mean, he's got to be, 7 or something? He's a top 10 fighter. And, this could be the fight that sets up to see who's fighting Kamaru Usman next. And we'll give our breakdown and our predictions next week. Or, sorry, not next week, in a few days on our midweek podcast. That will be episode 6. But yeah, so look out for that. A bit odd, it's at a 3 p.m. start time. Where is it? It's in Newark? In New Jersey? Why is it such an early start time in New Jersey? You'd figure with a time like that it'd be overseas, but I don't know. Yeah, so we got that. And then the week after that is the Valentina Shevchenko versus Liz Carmouche fight. And then it's the Stipe DC card. So we got a fight this next Saturday. The Saturday after that. I don't even know if they're taking any weeks off. Oh, it looks like they are taking a week off. After the Stipe DC fight, there is a week off. Because I know sometimes, once a month, they usually take a week off from just any fight nights or pay-per-views. But yeah, so that's our quick little podcast recapping the fights from UFC 240. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and if you watched it yourself, hope you liked it. And if you have any different takeaways from the fights from what I just broke down and what I said, then just let me know. What did you take away from the fights? What did you think happened? And if you didn't see the fights and this is just you learning about them, I hope I did a good enough job of describing kind of what each fight was about. I'm not going to give you a play-by-play of every single punch landed, but just give you a general feel of how the fights went down and what we could look forward to in the future out of each of these fighters that won and lost, and see where their careers take them. But yeah, so thank you guys for listening to this week's episode. Just remember, like, subscribe, and comment, and share it with a friend. You guys are on social media, share it. Put it on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, or something. Let them know that there's this small podcast that's trying to, just inform some people on some MMA as just through a fan's eye. And if you guys have any suggestions, like I said, on the future of this podcast with, how many times I should upload, anything. Audio quality, intro music, outro music, logos. Let me know. But thank you guys for listening to episode 5 of the main card, and I'll look forward to seeing you guys on Wednesday.